Hello, hey, this is Dr. Scott Hutchison here in Tucson, Arizona at Reproductive Health Center. And with me is a fine attorney, Heather Strickland, who is an adoption and third-party adoption and assisted reproduction attorney here in Tucson. She is a member of the Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproduction Attorneys, and we have known each other for years. She's done a great job for our patients with adoptions and with third-party reproduction cases. So if you need an adoption attorney, she is a fantastic one to consult with. My 2 cents worth is for if you're considering anything with adoption or assisted reproduction, you really do not want to cheap out on the attorney part of things. It is very painful and can be very expensive down the road. So shake loose your dollars at the appropriate time for the attorney. Get your appropriate legal advice. So we're going to talk about assisted reproduction primarily, and then maybe we'll talk about a little bit of adoption, just general adoption stuff. And I've got some questions about adoption stuff too, because it seems like it's changed a lot over time. But I'm going to let Heather Strickland here give you the definition of assisted reproduction. And then I think she's going to give you kind of an overview of that history, which is really cool.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. So please chime in as I do the history of assisted reproduction, because I'm hoping you know a little bit more than I do. But in terms of what is assisted reproductive technology, it's conception by any means other than sexual intercourse. At least that's the way the law looks at it. Okay. So it can be by medical treatment in this office, or it can also be by do-it-yourself at home. Okay. So what we're commonly talking about is intrauterine insemination, either using a partner sperm or a donor sperm, IVF, which can be partner's eggs and sperm, or it can be donor's egg or sperm, in any of those combinations. And then, of course, we're also talking about surrogacy, which is either where somebody uses a traditional surrogate to help them achieve a pregnancy, or a gestational carrier who has no genetic connection to the child, and she is just going to gestate the pregnancy for someone.
So the surrogate thing was it's her egg, and then she gets inseminated.
The traditional surrogate,
was the traditional
yes.
surrogate.
And that was the traditional way that surrogacy came about. And then, of course, medical technology advanced, and now the woman carrying the pregnancy doesn't have to have any genetic connection to the child she's going to deliver.
Right. What about, tell a little bit about that baby M case, because that still is sort of haunting to me. Like I kind of remember that. Or was that
no, that's okay. Why don't you fast forward in my history here? Let's take it straight to the 90s. So that was the case out of Michigan. It was a traditional surrogacy situation where the woman was inseminated using the intended father's sperm, and then she gave birth and didn't want to give up custody of the child. And then she absconded with the child to another state. So a number of states were involved in that. And unfortunately, that was, it was a terrible situation, but it resulted in a backlash in terms of a lot of states then setting laws to outlaw surrogacy. Arizona being one of them. And as other states have changed and evolved, unfortunately, Arizona's laws have not necessarily evolved with it. Right. So the baby M cases was late 80s or early 90s, and that was a situation that really did, made people fearful, made people really scared. But I mean, some of the other milestones that we've hit in terms of assisted reproduction is that the first pregnancy using frozen sperm was reported in 1954. So we're talking about not long history of assisted reproduction here. The first IVF baby was, of course, Louise Brown in 1978. And then it wasn't until 1984 that we had the first live birth using frozen embryos. So fertility clinics haven't had to report to the CDC their success rates and all of that. That started in 1982. Yeah. So again, very, very recent history in terms of assisted reproduction. So and the reason why I think that's really important to understand is because it takes a long time for laws to catch up to medical technology.
Yeah.
And your profession is changing and growing at leaps and bounds. And honestly, the laws have been left behind.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, well, to illustrate that, all you got to do is look at, people talking about the Constitution. Like there are people who think Constitution should never be, it's immutable.
Right.
That's just the way it is.
Right,
yeah.
Right. So, I mean, there have been some really big changes in assisted reproduction that have been real game changers for families who are looking to, or people who are looking to create their families. But like I said, the laws haven't kept pace. And I'd say probably the last one that I kind of have on my list is that in 2014, the egg freezing technology had evolved to the point where egg freezing was, for fertility preservation, was going more mainstream.
Yeah.
Now you might be able to tell me about more medical advances than that I don't know about. So that history is important, like I said, because our laws haven't kept pace. So at least in Arizona, the bulk of our laws relating to families, and certainly maternity and paternity, were developed in the 70s. And so that's the foundation of a lot of those laws. Now they've certainly changed and grown, but we have to think about when those laws, the foundation of those laws were set. This was the 70s. None of this assisted reproduction was available.
Right.
DNA testing wasn't necessarily even available at that time. So establishing who's a mom and who is a dad was kind of easy, at least with respect to the mom.
Yeah.
And then maybe not quite as easy with men until DNA came around.
Sure. Yeah. Interesting.
So I think if people go into their appointment with an attorney understanding that we are sometimes dealing with some archaic laws, they'll be a little bit more understanding of why things aren't necessarily don't match with the medical marvels that you're able to do.
Exactly. But why you want to have your ducks in a row, I's dotted, T's crossed, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So when we're talking about sperm and egg and embryo donation agreements, what we're really looking at, the goals that we're trying to accomplish is twofold. One is who has the ownership and control of those gametes or those embryos. So who has the right to say they need to live in this storage facility, or who's responsible for paying for these things. And then the other part is who's responsible for any resulting children that come from any of those things.
Right.
So, and unfortunately, our laws are not super clear on that. So,
but you can make contracts that are pretty protective of everybody's rights.
The way they're protective is that they're putting in writing everybody's intent, which is such an important thing for everyone to do. And it's important that everyone put in writing their intent at the time that they're performing these acts and making these gifts to people, instead of us going back, later in time, maybe after a pregnancy's been achieved or after a child's been born, and trying to say, oh, well, what was everybody's intention? What was everyone really planning on doing? At the time that these gifts are being made and families or babies are being created, we need to be doing the legal paperwork and laying out everybody's intent.
Wow.
So just kind of looking at what are my I think I really prefer to see people in my office before the appointments are scheduled for, egg retrieval or sperm donation, just because it's a lot easier for people to absorb information and hear what I have to say when they don't have the pressure of an appointment in the back of their minds of like, well, but the egg retrieval is going to take place in 2 weeks, something like that.
Absolutely.
So.
No, yeah, that's just nothing but bad.
Yes.
All kinds of bad things can happen with that.
Right.
So, we've had a fair amount of people who've had family members donate eggs for them, for example. Right. And I've always said it's really better if we can have those women who are donating the eggs, the family members, have already completed their family building. Is that an issue for you? Do you think that's it's better and cleaner legally, or is it all okay no matter if they haven't had, kids early on?
I really don't think it has much impact on the legal aspects of an agreement, but it is something that I also talk to people about as well, because as we all know, these medical technologies don't come without risk. And if somebody's family is not complete, and by virtue of a donation, something happens and they lose an ovary, or they lose a uterus, or they lose their ability to continue to create their own family, that can create tension between, the person who was donating and the people who were receiving.
Right.
So I always think it's something, it's probably better for everyone involved if they have completed their family, but there's no legal requirement for it.
Okay.
But also people might want to consider purchasing insurance policies of different, all kinds, in part to just make sure that the person who's donating to them is going to be appropriately compensated if something does happen to them in that process.
Right. We have egg donors who are anonymous egg donors who are donating eggs, and the policies, and they cover a lot. Like they'll cover all of if they were to have a complication. We've never had to use them, but the policy that would cover all the hospitalization and all this other like stuff and disability is like $250. So it's not like it's like a super huge expense.
Right.
So
I mean, and when you're talking about like if this is a friend, or especially if it's a family member, to know that policy is in place to protect this person who's going to be giving you this gift. I mean, that's just worth it for family dynamics and for keeping the peace within a family. Absolutely.
Because especially you look at like, I don't know about all of our insurances, but I know that mine has this gigantic deductible now, and it's, so you have to go into the hospital or something. Your family member could be out, $10,000 or whatever. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So definitely looking into insurance policies is important.
Idea.
So you want to give yourself enough lead time to have the conversation with the attorney, and then have the time to go explore some of these things, such as insurance policies, before those appointments for retrieval are made. Again, just because everyone needs to be protected, everyone needs to have had the opportunity to really think about what they're doing, and maybe explore options such as those insurance policies, before you have the pressure of, okay, we've started meds and we need to go into this retrieval on X day.
Right. Well, in the timeline, it should be fairly long anyway, because especially for, say, egg donation, these egg donors are supposed to be really fertile, right? They're not like running out of time.
Mm-hmm.
So there should be ample time for them to also explore, the egg donors to explore how they feel about it, and to make sure that they don't want to change their mind. I've seen some situations in my career where I really felt like there was significant coercion, and I just had to pull the plug on those and just say, we're not going to go forward with this.
Right.
And they're like, no, she's okay with it. She's okay. And it's like, no, it's not the vibe I'm getting with this. But yeah, so everything should be super, super deliberate.
Right.
Yeah.
And because Arizona does not have a strong statutory structure for egg donation or sperm donation or even embryo donation, there's very little here that's about legal requirements. It's more about what's best practices. So having a donor egg or sperm have that psychiatric evaluation, or that meeting with the social worker, just to make sure that they're doing this for the right reasons, and that there aren't any concerns about issues about grief or loss that could be coming up. It's really important to have that professional involved. And again, early on in the process, before people become too committed and too excited and this.
Right. Yeah, because I think you set all the retrievals up and all that, and then there becomes this whole other layer of coercion that can happen with the potential donor.
It's kind of like signing a prenuptial agreement. You don't want to be doing it on the eve of your wedding. You want to have had plenty of time to think about this and to have negotiated it. And for,
Yeah.
you don't want all, the cake and balloons and the flowers to all be there and you're signing the agreement.
Yeah. Here,
So,
here.
yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of how long it can take to do an agreement, it's really a matter of weeks, but, there's the initial draft that's done, but then there's a negotiation phase, and then there's the time to execute it. So, and it also depends too on the attorney's availability.
Right.
It's sometimes, we don't have the time right then and there to do a particular agreement, and maybe the space opens
Right.
up in our calendar in about a week or two.
Right.
So.
Well, and that's something that I think that you need to understand about law is that, you have to do it. The attorney has to do this writing and they have to grind this thing out. And so but also I think that if you're going to someone who just does adoption and assisted reproduction law, it's going to make it a whole lot more streamlined than if you're using an attorney who does a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and these are not cookie cutter agreements.
Right.
This is not something where I take a template and just fill in some names and say, here you go. I really do craft each one of these agreements based on the needs of the people who have come to me.
Right.
And so there is time and attention paid to the details and what goes into it. And again, these are their agreements. So the agreements can contain a lot of things that they want that it's not so much about what's required by law as much as it is what is best practice, but then also what do they want? And they may have some very different provisions depending on the circumstances. If your sister is the one who's donated your eggs to you, part of the conversation is going to be like, who's going to tell mom and dad?
Right.
Extended family. Who are we really going to tell about this? Because, and making sure that identifying who's going to talk to the child and when, and respecting those kinds of boundaries as well. So
yeah, really, really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
I've seen little books now, little children's books that kind of use the different colored elephants or what to explain, whose role was what in the whole creation of the child. But,
right. No, there's some excellent children's books about it. So, and I think, people educating themselves too on what am I facing if I use donor egg or donor sperm or donor embryos, in terms of informing the child about their history and those kinds of things, I think is really important. So,
I can't imagine now withholding that information from a child, but there could be people out there who still want to do that.
I think the reality that people need to recognize is that anonymity in gamete donation is gone. It just does not exist anymore. With this DNA testing that's available, and available through these kits that you get in the mail, it's just impossible to remain anonymous. So it's not if it's found out that this child was born using donor gametes, it's about when. And just preparing yourself that you need to have that conversation.
Right.
So I see in my office, and it's kind of documented nationwide, there's an uptick in the number of calls about, oh my gosh, I just found out that my father was donated his sperm or something like that. We see the uptick in that around Mother's Day, Father's Day, and Christmas, because people get the DNA testing kits as gifts for the holidays. And everyone thinks it's a great idea, so they do their swabs and send it in, and all kinds of new things are discovered.
So. That's awful.
So, but to be fair to those people who had donated long ago, they were promised anonymity. They were promised that nobody would ever find out, and that just technology created a situation where that meant that was impossible.
Right. Yeah, we've had some. I've been in practice long enough to see some situations where someone, for very good reason, wanted to go back and contact the donor.
Mm-hmm.
And the donor had originally said, you can contact me, but he was in college at the time.
Right.
He's, a brain dead college guy. And, then fast forward 15 years and I'm calling this guy saying, hey, is this okay for you to be contacted about this? And I remember one case in particular, the guy said, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Don't call me again. I don't want I'm married now. I have my own kids. I do not want to have anything to do with this.
Right.
So strange world though.
It is a
the
strange
DNA
world,
testing.
yeah. And the thing about the DNA testing is it might not be that the donor, him or herself, is on those DNA testing websites, but their nephew or their uncle might be. So there's connections being made through family members, and
yeah, really creepy. But I think they caught that Golden State murderer with that. It was similar kind of
thing. Yes.
Fill in the blanks, get all the data from a whole bunch of his relatives.
Yeah.
It's an interesting world.
Yes. It's really, I mean, it is a really interesting world. All the more reason why sometimes we have to put some of those things into these agreements too.
Right.
We have to think about these kinds of things as well.
Yeah. Again, don't scrimp. This is not a do-it-yourself project.
And I mean, people, can you find contracts on the internet? Absolutely. But
don't do that.
They're not going to be crafted for the individuals. They may not even apply to the right state's laws. So I mean, it's just it's not a good idea. If you're forming your family this way, then you deserve to have, both sides deserve to have a consult with an attorney to get a complete picture and a complete information.
Here.
Yeah.
So, do you have more about assisted reproduction?
Well, I just want to encourage people to. Again, part of reaching out to the attorney is also understanding that the contract is for the donation. It's not the end of the story. There's oftentimes follow-up legal work that we want to do after a child's born to ensure that the donor has no rights or responsibilities for any resulting children, and that the intended parents, the people who commissioned the creation of the child in the first place, are actually the ones that are no doubt going to be always deemed the legal parents of the child. So almost always when we have any kind of gamete donation, I'm suggesting follow-up of either a termination of the donor's parental rights, or oftentimes I'm recommending some kind of a spousal adoption. And I know it seems really odd to people and offensive to have to adopt a child that was born into their marriage, but it's just the best way right now for us to ensure and secure that somebody's a parent of a child and that nobody else can have a claim to the child.
Hear, man. Cheap insurance.
Yes. Yeah. So especially for those involved in same-sex marriages and relationships.
Right.
In particular, they need to be looking at what follow-up work do we need to do?
Right. Good plan.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else on the?
I had all those things that we were talking about. So we talked about don't do it online, don't get it online.
Right.
I think the other thing is to know, just sort of in general too, is depending on your scenario, and everybody's situation is different. We may not be applying Arizona law. We might have the opportunity to apply the laws of a different state. And so another reason why to talk to an attorney, because somebody can walk you through your scenario and your situation and say, hey, we think that, this, you might be better served by using these state's laws.
Yeah. So that specifically applies to like gestational carriers, embryo transfers. So it's California, Nevada, Maine.
Yeah, California, Nevada, and Maine are great states that have really strong legal structures for recognizing gestational carriers and families formed with the use of a gestational carrier.
Okay.
Yeah.
So look into ways of making that happen. Okay. So we have this patient question. I'm curious as to the laws of the second parent in the same-sex relationship. Does the non-bio parent have to adopt the child to have as many legal rights, even if the sperm was purchased at the sperm bank?
So, and I can only talk generally. I can't speak to anybody's specific situation, but in general, right now, Arizona does recognize that a child born into a marriage is a child of both of those spouses, regardless of whether the makeup of the marriage is the same sex.
Yeah.
But we're just Arizona.
Right.
What about if people move and people think, oh, I'll never leave? But life changes, you never know.
Right.
So again, in general, I almost always recommend some kind of follow-up adoption when a when we've had donor sperm, whether known or unknown,
Right.
to ensure that that there's no doubt that this other spouse is the parent of the child, and that nobody can ever come in and attack that. So, and adoption orders of adoption have been around for a very long time. Adoption's recognized as a legal way to
Right.
form a family, and we have a really great Supreme Court case that says you have an order of adoption from one state, it has to be given full faith and credit around the country.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, and then if they even lost that paperwork in the move, it's still recorded here in Arizona.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
they could always get it.
Yeah. And then also one of the benefits of having done an adoption is that if a birth certificate lists a mother and a father, at least in the state of Arizona, if it lists mother and a father, but an adoption is then done, it will now list parent and parent.
Parent and parent.
Yes.
Cool.
So
A little antiquated.
yeah.
But that's
That's
Arizona
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah.
For some of these things.
So I see that we do have a viewer who asked what's the average cost of an agreement for a donor. Well, I think you definitely want your donor represented by an attorney, and then you want the people who are going to be the recipients of the donation to be represented by an attorney. And so it's hard to know exactly what those costs are going to be, but I think it's fair to probably budget about $3,000 across both attorneys.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Getting super cheap insurance for all that can go wrong.
Right.
You know, with custody or all kinds of weird stuff. Yeah. 3,000 is a drop in the bucket to what you could pay if you don't do it.
Right. To be litigating this issue afterwards.
Yeah,
Yes.
the litigation thing.
Yeah.
Our we have a daughter who's an attorney, and so she's done some litigation, and I don't know the specifics of what her case is, but this has been going on for a long period of time, and there are multiple attorneys involved in this litigation, and I just think that is it's just got to be, the bills just have to be phenomenal for that. I mean, this firm is just, it's got to be a huge amount of money that these people are having to pay.
Right.
Yeah,
It's always better to do the pre-planning and to set up your journey, whether it's through donation or gestational carrier, set up your journey in a way that's going to be the most legally secure.
And then when you have a kid, but for sure, you go ahead and you do like a will and a trust.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you got to do that stuff.
You got to do your estate planning.
Do your estate plan, yeah, because none of us like to think about dying, but we ain't getting out of it alive. So, yeah.
Right.
Well, cool. Okay, what else? Oh, there was something else. The wife is listed as the father in her daughter's birth certificate, but again, it can be parent.
It can be parent and parent after an adoption takes place.
After adoption, yeah.
Yes.
So you might want to look into that. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
What else on assisted reproduction law?
Well, it's rapidly changing in other parts of the country. And so I think, and also there's a lot of companies that are coming up that are making themselves available to help people match with a gestational carrier or with donors and things like that. But for the most part, these companies, depending on where they are, they're not regulated at all.
Right.
So, I mean, this is an industry that isn't very heavily regulated. So I think it's really important to turn to your physician or your lawyer for recommendations on reputable companies to help you find donors, help you find gestational carriers,
Right.
because there's just so many companies out there that are doing these matches.
Well, and some of it is downright shady. So I saw a case recently where a patient was hooked up with a gestational carrier, had already paid $35,000 down or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and the gestational carrier said, "Oh, I can't do it at this time," and backed out. And so the company, who was her agent, refused to give the money back.
Yeah.
And so luckily the patient went to an attorney and was able to get most of it back. But I was pretty horrified at that, because it was the patient who was going to be the parent who had, in good faith, they just paid their money. They had nothing to do with the cycle getting canceled,
right?
Because the gestational carrier kind of, had other things going on. But yeah.
It's also a good idea to contact an attorney to review those agreements that you're going to sign with those companies before you sign them.
Right.
Just to make sure you really understand what are the terms of that agreement. what am I paying for? What are they going to do for me? What are they not going to do for me?
Right.
And what is the refund policy or the rematching fee and those kinds of things.
Exactly.
And it's really hard to compare companies because their contracts are all different. Their structure of how they charge is different. Some of them are a la carte. Some of them are single fee. So sometimes it's trying to compare apples and oranges, and it can be really challenging. So, but always, if you're thinking about working with a company, ask to see the agreement and give yourself the time to talk to an attorney and go over that agreement.
Yeah.
When you're talking about $125,000,
oh yeah,
you need to have that. You should really have that reviewed by an attorney.
Yeah.
So you owe it to yourself just to have that peace of mind.
Cheap insurance. Yeah. Oh, and I forgot to give you the bio on Heather Strickland here. So she grew up here in Tucson, went to Greenfields for high school, and then went to Smith College, and which is quite fine, and then came back here to the U of A Law School, and then has been here since.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tucson native and born and raised.
Yeah. Pretty cool.
Love having my roots down in my hometown.
Yeah, it's neat. So, should we talk about a little bit of adoption now, or what should we? So, I have a question. It seemed to me that adoption was way less expensive in adjusted dollars when I first came back to Tucson in 95, 96. Is that true, or am I just being like an old guy going, well, in my day, a new car was $3,000.
There may be a smidge of that, but unfortunately, adoption has also become very expensive, and there's a lot of reasons for that as well. The internet is phenomenal and amazing, but it does mean that there's a lot of competition out there for agencies and facilitators and so forth to find those prospective or expectant parents. And so there's a lot of money having to be spent on advertising. The internet. The internet is how people make connections.
Yeah.
Also, depending on again where you live, there's the living expenses that you might pay to an expectant mother to help ensure that she has a healthy pregnancy. And while that's certainly your choice how much you do that, I have seen those numbers start to creep up. So it is very expensive to do an adoption as well. I think there's power in having knowledge. So if you're considering a third-party reproduction and you're already going to an attorney to talk to them about that, have a consult too on adoption. So you just know what your options are and you can be comparing the two. And so you can be thinking through both options at the same time. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a stat recently that, especially in Arizona, our teen pregnancy rate had fallen a lot. So it seems like there's fewer adoptable babies out there. Is that kind of your impression now too?
The adoptions are down, but there's always been this problem of there are more prospective adoptive parents than there are birth mothers or expectant mothers. That's just always been the situation. But I think, interestingly, it's actually not the teens that tend to place their babies for adoption.
Right.
The more likely person to be considering adoption is a woman who's in her 20s, maybe 30s. She might already have a child or two at home.
Right.
Oftentimes she is working, but she's working a lower paying job. But women who already have children at home know how hard it is and how expensive it is to raise a child. And so they are actually more likely to be a prospective person to place a child for adoption than a teenager. So, yeah. But it is good news that the teenage pregnancy rate's going down. That's good.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. We get a fair amount of patients from New Mexico. And recently I had a couple of couples tell me, because they also were interested in adoption, and they were telling them, don't even think about using or demanding that your adoptive mother not smoke, because they all smoke. Right. And I was pretty stunned at that. I can expect meth and a lot of marijuana and stuff. But I was like, wow, all of them smoke. It was really interesting.
Yeah. Well, a lot of those lifestyle choices go hand in hand. The smoking and the marijuana, and yeah. So
we had one of my residents had said that they had to go in and tell this woman that they were having to call Child Protective Services because she had failed her toxin screen. And then the woman said, well, what did it show? And they said, well, you had marijuana and meth and alcohol and marijuana and meth. And the woman said, oh man, that is so wrong. Somebody must have put it in my beer.
Oh goodness. Yeah. Now you're scaring everyone off of adoption, though.
No, we've had dozens and dozens and oodles and noodles of patients who've adopted happily. So I would encourage you to. Yeah. One of my best friends was adopted, and that's a great thing.
And people should not be worried about forming their family in whatever way works for them. So perhaps they did IVF and that worked for them for their first child, but perhaps that's not an option second time around. So maybe they're looking at adoption. I mean, no, you shouldn't let anybody judge you for using different ways to form your family. It's totally acceptable to form your family in whatever way works for you in that.
Oh, absolutely. Gosh, we got a lot. We see a lot of that. It's really cool. And the egg donation thing, I remember, even when I was a fellow, there was people were dying to know, like, do women who already have children who then marry a younger guy and they've kind of aged out of having kids, are they going to like these donor egg babies as much as their own babies?
Oh, interesting.
And the answer was yes. They self-identify with them as being their children just as much as the biologic offspring. So interesting stuff.
Well, I see we have another question from a viewer, and that is, what's the approximate cost of a second parent adoption in Arizona? I would say, plan on budgeting between $1,500 and $2,000, for the adoption part. Now, obviously, can be a lot of complicating factors to that, such as, do we have any birth father issues that we're dealing with? If it's not a donation situation, what are we looking at with that? So, but certainly for the adoption, probably $1,500 to $2,000.
Right on. Yeah, if you have a birth father problem, then you need a lot of.
There are other things we have to discuss.
Yeah, but that money will be well spent with the attorney rather than having to again litigate something down the road.
Okay.
Well, cool. Anything else you want to say about just adoption law or third-party reproduction stuff?
Well, thank you very much for having me and letting me come talk about this. I just really do. I'm seeing an increased number of people who are sort of do-it-yourself matching with donors or gestational carriers, and I think that's wonderful. I understand that that's happening, but don't skimp on the attorney.
Exactly.
Everyone needs to be represented.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, anyway, any other questions? And then I'll turn it off. But thank you for joining us. Remember, look at our other patient education things on our Facebook page here. And Karina, any announcements for the future? No. In the future, you'll see Karina because she's going to do one of these things with me too.
No, I'm not.
So anyway, but thank you and have a great night. And if you have other questions down the road, you can always send them in, and we will try to answer them on another one of these Facebook Live sessions. So thank you.
Thank you.